Hey, welcome back. So I'm up in Alexandria right now, about to take this exhibition down. Um, this is the show 2020, and I thought I'd take the opportunity just to talk a little bit about each piece. This one, I Can't Breathe. All of this work was done 2020 into 2021. This particular piece, as the name would imply, I Can't Breathe, is done right after the protests started, after the murder of George Floyd, and I Can't Breathe became sort of the anthem of the protest because it was the last words he said. This particular piece, and I don't know how much you can see, is painted over an existing painting, and that existing painting included the Lee Monument in Richmond, Virginia. The Lee Monument became quite a focal point of graffiti, which is sort of what's being captured here, and became an incredible installation art piece until it was finally removed. This work was sort of trying to react, and then by painting it over an existing painting that included the monuments, an unsuccessful painting, but nevertheless painting over another painting really brought another layer of hopefully what's becoming a transition from our old way of thinking about the South and white people's relationship to the rest. Looks like I've got this thing upside down. So anyway, so just want to give just a brief talk. And like I say, this piece is done over top of another very thick texture. Really brings another level, another layer to the paintings. So behind me you can see, and I'll talk about it and move the camera, Who Cares, which is another demonstration piece. So let me just shift camera. And Who Cares is about, now this was a piece, this actually was the lockdown demonstrations, and what I was really struck during these demonstrations is outside, I believe this was in Michigan, that the nurses and healthcare providers came out and stood in silent vigil as those egged on by the former president came and just were incensed that their lives had been shut down, and one of them was carrying what I found very ironic, "Give me liberty or give me death" was the slogan. So this is liberty or death. The irony comes that their liberty to not wear masks and to not protect themselves and others could very well bring their death. Maybe not their death, but they could spread death to others. I do know of a family who subscribed to this mentality, and both parents passed away of COVID, leaving their children orphaned, rather than the simple inconvenience of a mask. So this piece, and many of those, so ironically, the piece behind me is one side of the racial political divide, and these two represent another. And of course, they were also walking around heavily armed, which just seems so bizarre when all these people were trying to do was save their lives. And these, regardless if this guy caught COVID or not, this caregiver would do everything they could to keep them alive. So now we'll switch to the next piece, and this was actually the last piece that I did during the course of putting this exhibition together. And this is called I Didn't Know. Now, this one is sort of confessional. This painting is a story that I've walked around with since 98 or 99. So this is a self-portrait. And the event that's depicted here was I had come out of a building late at night. This gentleman was a director, film director. In particular, I was showing him some work with the possibility of doing a video for D'Angelo, doing the set for a video for D'Angelo. And I was showing him some work in a building. And as we came out of the building late at night, I had turned to lock the door, and he had gone down the steps. I hear, "Get on the ground, MFR, blah, 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 blah," just screaming, explicatives deleted, racial slurs, and I turned to find him on the ground, hands behind, gun drawn by a white policeman. And as I came out of the gate, so then they saw me, and what upset me so much besides that was then they said to me, "Excuse me, sir, do you realize you tripped a silent alarm?" And to me, the deference paid to me and the racial slurs given to him, I had been having an argument about this whole blacking while driving while black as being absurd. Now, of course, I'm white, so how would I know? And this was my first very poignant opportunity to see just how different the treatment was, and so this painting is about, I need to understand my position of privilege, to recognize that that isn't for everyone, to challenge why isn't that for everyone, and to hold up a mirror not only to myself, but to all of us, to make sure that we are not taking things for granted. So this painting, more than any other in the show perhaps, is a personal challenge towards myself to recognize where the differences lie and to not accept them, nor should any of us. So I'm taking this exhibition as it's hung. So we started in the front of the gallery and walking through the gallery. So they're not, the paintings are not hung in sequential order, nor are they meant necessarily to be seen in sequential order. So this piece, Drive-By Pandemic, early on in the pandemic, so this painting was done in May. So this probably in mid-April of 2020, I was concerned that I had COVID, and so had finally found out I was able to go to an emergency area. But this is when you didn't even go in the building. You didn't get out of your car. All of the testing was done in the seat of your car, so much so that this is just the taking your temperature and all, and then you would rock your seat back and they'd tickle your brain with a Q-tip. But then it was just all done right there. The good news was I was negative, but it was just such a change in how we perceive medical care. I mean, like hazmat suits and full PPE, glasses, everything, and not even being allowed into the building. And at this point, this was an urgent care facility. This was all they were doing. Nobody went in the building. You got a broken arm, I don't know where you went at that point. But nevertheless, so this piece was really trying to deal with that. And again, hold a light to just where we were. The next piece is again back to a demonstration image. So I'm going to pause this. And because of the way this is hung in the gallery, I can't quite get back far enough from it. So this piece is called, here, and I'll just pan down a little bit, hopefully gently. It is "The road to hell is paved with good and bad intentions." So the day that the election was announced, I headed out for a bike ride. Now this doesn't want to pan the way I want it to. There we go. And sorry about the finger blocking the camera. So I'd gone out, and so first went by the Lee Monument Center was very celebratory and reverent and quiet. And then as I said, okay, well so I stood there for a while and sort of enjoyed that piece of that. Then I headed on out past the city, or out of the city towards the east end of town where there's a nice bike trail and there's great roads to ride. And I heard a megaphone and a few people yelling. And this was at the base of the capital of Virginia. There was a guy here on the megaphone going on about how the election had been stolen and how Trump never took a paycheck, which wasn't true, and all of this stuff. And he was just going on and on and on, expounding on the big lie. What was intriguing to me was there were more counter-protesters, press, and police than there were demonstrators who are sort of represented by what has now become a red hat. Has such a charged image now that, I can't, if I had a red hat, I wouldn't wear it anymore. But what was interesting was this guy had on his pussy hat, the pink pussy hats from the Women's March, right after the guy who lost the election won his only election. He didn't really win that one either. But so it was just sort of trying to show all sides of what was going on in 2020. This was a big part of it. I completed this painting on the 1st of the new year of 2021. And I always make every attempt to start my new year painting. So I finished this painting, and if you know your contemporary American history, you know that 5 days later, these people went to the ultimate extreme in their election denial and trying to keep the former president in office. So now I'll shift again to the next painting. And so this one I should talk about, so this piece was sort of this idea of trying to ring this sense of confrontation here in all of the observers, and by the fact that here I'm another observer, so I'm making the viewer of the painting become another observer of this moment, of this incident. And this was, of course, I didn't sketch this or photograph it or anything. I hold images in my mind, so like that previous painting, I didn't know. I've held that one in my head for almost 25 years before I put it to paper. And so this image, and that allows me some time to distill and think about the images and get them down to their essence. And so we'll sort of move on now. The next piece was actually done from some sketches. In fact, the next two were done from images. So this piece initially, this was completed in early February, so there was a lot of news, but we didn't know what was coming when I did this piece. So this was actually one of the last times, other than at work, I was in a restaurant. This is a local French-inspired coffee shop. Well, restaurant, but in the morning they do sort of a little coffee thing. And so this is this piece it's called Telling Stories. And if you've ever worked food service, there's a whole lot of time spent telling stories about the previous shift, about the workers, or gossiping about the night before, or inside or outside of the co-workers. And then it's sort of like the idea of telling stories, but then he is reading a story, or maybe he's listening to the story that the servers are telling. And of course, telling stories, telling stories is another way of saying they're lying or they're making things up. But this one was done actually from a couple of sketches. I think these two were one sketch. So it's 3 different sketches. And that was built, and then I love doing this. Some of my very early work was just coffee cups And so this is sort of a self-reference. One of the very first pieces I did with the paint sticks was 3 coffee cups in a row. And amazing to me is the piece is only about yay big. But so this is sort of a nod back to myself. But then if you look at this piece, there's also these small circles from her elbow, but these 2 coffee cups are balanced by the red stools, and then these circles are repeated again in these 2 cups, and the spirals of the cafe chair and even the table. So it's just a constant ring and ring and ring and ring. So when you build a piece, you need to develop a rhythm. I've always said I'm not smart enough to do abstract paintings, but this is really an abstract painting. You know, that's how it's built. I just hang a narrative onto it. The next piece is also a series of built from a series of sketches. So this is the second time I've done this exhibition. And the first time was down in North Carolina. It included some sketches that aren't in this one. But this piece, An Analogous Metaphor, was created as the final note of this 2020 exhibition originally. And then between that exhibition and this one, I did the I Didn't Know piece and included in this one. So this was, I'd seen a bunch of construction workers having lunch together, and they were multiracial and multi-ethnic. And I felt like that was a great thing to talk about, that as we came out of, well, we're still not out of the pandemic, but this piece was done in June of 21. But it was, as we continue to come back, we have to look towards building together. So the idea of construction workers, of sitting down and eating and talking and rebuilding, literally, in this case, literally rebuilding a structure, that was an image to capture and sort of point the way forward. And again, this painting, back to this idea of rhythms, with the circles repeated by the 2 cones, and even the cones in a thermos cone, cone, and that, but also the title, An Analogous Metaphor. So it was sort of playing around with analogous color scheme, because this piece is basically greens, yellows, greens, and blues, which is analogous on the color wheel. Now there is the counterbalance, the complement of the dominant blue is the orange. And then of course it's a metaphor, as I just said. The idea of construction workers rebuilding is a metaphor for where we need to be politically, socially, consciously, back to rebuilding things together. So, and then the next piece goes back to the other side of the coin. So this is the largest one in the exhibition. It's There Will Be Peace. And my wife is the one who, the actor Bridget Gethens, who comes up with the titles for my work. She was infinitely superior, like referring back to those coffee cup pieces. I'd done a painting and called it 4 Cups of Coffee. And she went, no. That's intimate conversation. And from that point on, I was like, yes, you can come up with the titles. I'm a visual person. I'm not a verbal. I don't write. Well, I do write, but I'm not a writer. I'm not. The images that I conceive, I conceive of them visually, not as a story, although they are clearly a story. So this piece is about, again, back to the riots in the Black Lives Matter protests, and to me, the incredibly excessive, overhanded, heavy-handed response that the police force has. And in this case, This particular image was from outside of a precinct downtown, near where the monuments, which were the focus, but the police had gone so heavy-handed that it became literally, I mean, I was looking at a war zone. I mean, the barricaded quality. I was reminded of the relationship between the IRA and the British Army in Ireland. I mean, that's what I was seeing play out. I mean, there were videos of these rolling protests and fights and skirmishes that I thought I was looking at Kosovo. It was just stunning. And this figure here is holding a rubber bullet. And there's a piece in the stained glass that I'll show you in the last group of images where someone got hit in the face with one of these and the damage that it. But I mean, you know, the level of militarization versus, you know, people expressing their opinions, and you can go on the violence, but in Richmond in particular, people were having a peaceful protest, and the curfew was at 7 p.m. And at 6:30, the police rolled up like this and started shooting tear gas and everything. So this was too much, and it sparked this to be too much. But this piece and where this gallery is hung, and I have a piece called "What Do You Believe," which was a reaction to the Charlottesville protests and eventual killing by the counter-protest of a counter-protester by one of the protesters, and that was about protecting the monuments. And it was called, oh, I can't even remember. I actively don't remember this absurdities or serial killers or those kind of things. I'm not giving them that headspace. But that painting hung at this exact same place in this gallery. Just noticing how warped this piece of wood is here. But anyway, so so the gallery hung it in the same place, and it was sort of their idea. And there's some similarities structurally with the repeating batons here. In that case, it was the tiki torches that repeated, and the explosions and burning was again the tiki. So these guys are literally using flash bombs and spraying tear gas, and that's what this is all about back here, the tear gas game right here. But and now we'll totally switch gears on the imagery. Now it's funny, I talked about not having a red hat, but nevertheless. So this is a self-portrait. And this was early on, so this is, actually these two pieces were done pretty close together. But this is April, mid-April. Both of these two, and the next one as well, are mid-April. And of course, the two things we all did during lockdown, a lot of us got out in our gardens. So I was working on this piece, and you know, I was planting irises in the front yard, and I had this is how I was sitting on we have a little hill that goes up from the street. So I was on the hill and planting iris bulbs. And I realized as I worked on the piece that I had this much of the piece done. And I was wearing a different color shirt initially in this painting. And I noticed how similar it was to Christie's World, the Andrew Wyeth painting, where she's way out in the field and there's the house up and the rise of the grass. And so I sort of pushed this a little bit more by switching. She wears a pink dress, and so I put the pink t-shirt in, and even the reaching of this hand wasn't initially in the concept. But just so, and that's actually sparked a series of images that I want. The most recent oil stick painting is sort of that's a great idea. Let's go back and interpret existing paintings. So while as this one happened, I created the work and then realized the similarity. Now I'm sort of going the other direction and building a piece that's based on existing paintings. But that's where this one came from, and so it's sort of a statement about how we all started lockdown, and what did we do with our time, and how did we cope with it, and how did we fill our days. Of course, I filled them in the studio and out on the bicycle. And the painting right next to it is Alone Together. And again, that whole idea about we were all isolated, we couldn't be together. And this is my wife, aforementioned actor Bridget Gethens, Skyping. We were sitting in bed and Skyping with our granddaughter. But that was how so many of us got together. Even this year, her big family Christmas was all done on Zoom. And then Belle, who's now passed away, was very much her companion dog. Yes, Belle. And we now have a new small dog, Cleo. That was my confusion. So this is sort of what we were all doing. I have another painting in mind that sort of uses some of the same composition. But that thing, how we all were isolated from each other, and we're connecting through social media, which may have been part of why all these other paintings happened, because we weren't sitting together and having conversations, or yelling at each other through the Ethernet. But so this piece is just, that celebration or documentation of that period when we were all isolated. And then the last group is the stained glass pieces, and I know there's some videos, but I'll show those all together. So these 4 pieces are all stained glass light boxes. Now, I was talking about the rubber bullet, and this is Frank Hunt, who was shot in the face in those same protests with the rubber bullet. And speaking of social media, I'd seen a photograph of him on Instagram standing with the eye patch on. He was also hitting the arm in patches, so he's treated. He almost lost his eye. I think the final outcome was he lost sight and kept the eye. But, so yes, rubber bullets are non-lethal. If he'd been shot in the face with a bullet, of course he wouldn't be here at all. But this piece just sort of became an icon. The idea of these icons started with this one, Agatha. And Saint Agatha is the patron saint of nursing, that's the title. But this idea of, let's face it, the healthcare workers were saintly in what they had to put up with and what they did to keep us all alive. So, and I had found a stock image of PPE gear, and she was pulling I say she, but the healthcare person was pulling gloves on. It was so close to the Christ spit addiction that's where that came from. And this whole idea of these is particularly the icons, the Greek Orthodox icons with the stylized halo around. This was a viral video of a young 7-8-year-old girl with her cornrows and beads, the mask pulled down, chanting "No justice, no peace" with such earnestness that it just became such a powerful image, and I wanted to capture that. The last is another image that I've held in my head, although I did get some photo documentation. In 1968, Ozzie Smith, when winning a gold medal at the Olympics in Mexico City, during the playing of the national anthem, he raised his fist in what was known as the Black Power sign. And so sort of this piece was also another way to call attention to that this struggle has been going on forever, and Black Lives Matter and Black Power are closely related, but 50 years apart. We're not making a lot of progress here. Well, we are, but not as much as we should be. So that's the exhibition. Appreciate you taking the time to look. A lot of these videos you can see on these pieces being created on previous videos, and all of the work is still available for sale. at my website, greigleach.com. And I appreciate you taking the time to look.